Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is the Sentinel watching over Geekdom, and welcome back to Sentinel Reviews. Today, we will be reviewing the Paternoster Gang Heritage 1, released in June of 2019, directed by Ken Bentley. The Paternoster Gang stars Neve McIntosh as Madame Vastra, Katrin Stewart as Jenny Flint, and Dan Starkey as Strax. I will try to avoid them as much as possible, but there will be spoilers ahead, so you have been warned. Also, this set, compared to the box sets I usually review, this set only contains 3 stories. So, hopefully that'll mean a shorter video, but let's see. Because I have no way to transition that. So, the Paternoster Gang opens with The Cars That Ate London by Jonathan Morris. And the story is pretty much, well, no, not pretty much. The story opens with Jenny going to the market to get a, to get a flock of pigeons for Madame Vastra, which creates a bit of a humorous exchange with the shopkeeper because, you know, it's like, he tells her, you were here last week buying a flock of pigeons, and Jenny's like, yeah, Madame Vastra likes them a lot, and she keeps losing them. And he's just like, oh, I don't care. My daughter needs a new set of clothes, or whatever it was he said. You know, the implication. Yeah, I explained the joke, so I'm not going to go any further. Boy, did I pick a bad time to record. But anyway, while Jenny's at the marketplace, an electric car suddenly rampages through the streets and crashes into the market with no driver. And funny enough, there was progress at the time of, you know, electric automobiles, but for various reasons, they ultimately faded out of popularity, again, at the time, due to not having substantial power. Basically, they ghosted over this in the making of. I don't know the actual history of it, but basically, they couldn't be powered efficiently like petrol-powered cars could at the time. So the fact that the car has no driver has sort of spurned Madame Vastra into investigation. And let's see, where to go with there. I actually took notes this time around, so yeah. Hoping that if I took notes, I'd have my talking points more in order and avoid dead space, but that didn't seem to work. So, Vastra and Jenny go to investigate sort of the manufacturer of these electric cars. And then finally he doesn't show up for the first third of the story, but then we meet Strax, who is sort of seeking employment at a nearby power plant, because in the hopes that they will let him have access to his generator so he can recharge. Which, that comes out of nowhere, you know? Unlike some of the other stories, where the team splits up, what Strax is doing here is kind of unclear, because he's already employed as Vastra's butler. He already has, well, the way the dialogue is set up, I believe he has access to a power supply. The way the dialogue sets it up, that need to work on phrasing and sentence structure. The way the dialogue sets it up, Strax already has access to a power supply, and there's no hint of anything that Vastra sent him to do this, so it's very unclear what Strax was doing at the beginning here. Meanwhile, Vastra and Jenny go to... And that's another thing, too, because we open with Vastra meeting this man who runs the power plant, and how it ties into the manufacturer of these electric cars. And after this first third of the story, the whole power plant angle just vanishes completely. Let's see, what else was there? There is some good moments. There's some good dynamics here. Like, for example, Jenny has been teaching Strax to pass for Cockney, and subsequently Strax's attempts at being Cockney are absolutely hilarious. And here's kind of the thing. Reviewing comedy is hard because, yes, there are things to criticize, but you can only say that's funny or that's not funny in so many different ways. This story is a very straight... Sorry, I keep looking back at my notes because I'm not sure where I want to go. Sorry, now I'm just reading my notes. And, again, because these are mysteries, I'm trying not to get spoilers. I'm trying not to give away the mystery of each story, because once you know what the mystery is, it kind of kills the drive to listen to it or to watch it. And yet somehow Columbo managed it. But this story is a very straightforward mystery, and how do I even want to go from there? Because if I'm being honest, all three of the stories are fairly straightforward mysteries. Sadly, it is a little transparent because, you know, because it gives away the villain in the beginning. And I do have issues with this villain too, because once they are revealed, this turns into a Fern Gully story. Not that Fern Gully is necessarily bad. Fern Gully, Avatar, movies like this, it's just, boy, they are preachy. And then and the story tries to play with that concept by involving a third party, but it doesn't work. This, like I said, the biggest problem is these types of stories aren't subtle, and they are so preachy. I've only ever seen this kind of story done once good, and that was Princess Mononoke. But is there anything else I want to sort of talk about here? Because surprisingly, I kind of have very little to say about the individual stories, and it's more what I want to say about the sets as a whole. Actually, I think I have quite a lot to say about the second story, but we'll wait when I get there. Ah, here we go. The climax is absolutely bonkers. And I don't really think there's a better way to describe it than that. And it's a little off-putting at first because, you know, despite being a science fiction story, it starts off very grounded, you know, very, not realistic, but just very, yeah, I think grounded is the best way to describe it. And then it goes, and then it just derails and just goes so nuts. And it's kind of amazing in that respect. This one, I don't remember if this was just an issue with this story, if it was an issue with the set as a whole, but it was the most prevalent in this story. You can tell that the story is kind of trying to go for a steampunk aesthetic, which is cool. I love steampunk. I love that aesthetic. I love that design. You're in for a good time with steampunk. And it doesn't quite hit the mark. You know, and I don't know if it's just the sound design not doing a good job, because usually the sound design is great, or if it's just because steampunk is such a visual aesthetic. Sort of the same thing with the cart chase. Yes, there's a car chase in this story. You know, it's called The Cars That Ate London, and it's okay, but it just doesn't work. And I don't know if that's just the sound design, if it's the performances, which are good. I'll kind of save that for the end. Or if it's the fact that, again, a car chase is such a visual thing. Overall, though, if nothing else, which thankfully isn't the case. The Cars That Ate London is a fun story. And with nothing else to say, that moves us into the next story in the set, A Photograph to Remember by Roy Gill. And again, this is a very fun story, which I'm thankful for, because my first Roy Gill story that I can recall was Animal Instinct from the Diary of a Song Series 5. It was decent, it was okay, but it was kind of weak. And subsequently after that, I've been hearing more Roy Gill stories pop up, and mainly in the spin-offs. Like, I think the last one I heard was from, prior to this, was from Missy. But, yeah, no, this is another fun story. The mystery here is that, well, actually it starts with Vastra giving Jenny and Strax the day off, and the more I see of it, it's Jenny and Strax kind of have a Henry Higgins, Eliza Doolittle thing going on. Only without the bet and the deception, you know. Jenny is teaching Strax to pass for human. And it's a very cute dynamic. I really enjoy it. I really enjoy the way they play off each other. And they're on their way to and Vastra is annoyed with Strax, and she's basically given him the day off because she can't deal with him. And she makes Jenny go with him. And they go to this exhibition where they see these spirit photographs. And, you know, despite initially thinking it's a double exposure, they learn through science, not getting into that these are legitimate spirit photographs. Meanwhile, Vastra is going to investigate the case of a man who recently died and then came back to life claiming to be someone else. And if anything, the way these two plots combine, because they do meet up and connect, it's a little ham-fisted. It's not as bad as I've seen some stories go, but yeah, it's a little blunt. Although this story does reward repeated listenings, especially when you learn what's going on, because then it makes some of the early lines, some of the early dialogue, and really hilarious, especially when we meet the Bloomsbury Bunch. And I feel confident talking about this because it's in the plot synopsis for this set, so Big Finish is the one who spoiled it. The Bloomsbury Bunch is a sort of rival group to the Paternoster Gang. I use rival in quotes because they're not private investigators. They are their own thing. They are... what would I even call them? They are schemers, basically. They are led by Ston, a Sontaran, who is sort of, really interestingly, renounced Sontar. And he's decided to become an entrepreneur, you know. That's sort of the way this story begins, because the mystery that happens is because of Ston's money-making scheme. And then we meet Tom Foster, a human male who is gay and in a relationship with Ston, and then Vela, a Silurian. Which, the Bloomsbury Bunch is great. I love the way they play off each other, and I love the way they play off the Paternoster Gang, but my issue is, it seems too soon to be doing this. Like, a couple of series had done the whole mirror thing in the past, and it always felt like some of those shows waited a while before they tried that, and the Paternoster Gang just jumps off the front end doing it. Like, the closest comparison I can think of is the Powerpuff Girls and the Rowdy Rough Boys. But yeah, and it's interesting to see, because they're not just, oh, it's the same team, but crooked, you know, a human, a Sontaran, a Silurian, because for the most part, they play different roles, too. Like, in the Paternoster Gang, Madame Vastra, the Silurian, is the leader, the brains, and In the Bloomsbury Bunch, it's Ston, the Centauran. And then you have Strax, who is the muscle, where in the Bloomsbury Bunch, it's Vela. And then you have Tom, the human. Which is pretty much just... Which he and Jenny are pretty much the only ones that are similar. But yeah, it's interesting to note the Bloomsbury Bunch is fun, and it makes this story much more enjoyable than it already was. Interestingly, though, the second half of the story is devoted to zombies. Yeah. And there's a weird disconnect, because the first half of the story was ghosts, and then the second half is zombies, and we got all this build-up and development to the whole ghost side of things, and we didn't get nearly as much to the zombies, and when we get the zombies, it just kind of falls flat. And there are other things, too, like, you know, we don't get anything new with Jenny's character, and that's something I'll talk about at the end, but I love the way she and Tom play off each other, because they are both, you know, gay in a time where that was even worse off than it is now. And, you know, they talk about their experiences, and, you know, it's just, it's really sweet, and the actors do a great job of it. I also like the relationship between Tom and Ston, because both actors do a great job of selling it, and, you know, what happens in the climax kind of hinges on their relationship, and it's done really well. What else was there? And it, thankfully, it ends on a way that we could potentially see the Bloomsbury Bunch again, which I would really look forward to. And that leads us to the finale of this set, The Ghosts of Greenwich by Paul Morris. Interestingly, this is also a ghost story, but thankfully, it does something very different, so it doesn't get repetitive from A Photograph to Remember. Wow. But the ghost story here is that in Greenwich, several people have reported seeing ghosts of people close to them, only to learn that the ghosts they are seeing are of people who are still alive. So, you know, the gang goes to Greenwich to investigate, and this one is actually really difficult to talk about because it's, again, another very standard story like The Cars That Ate London, only there's a lot less to talk about because most of the good stuff, I'll start off by saying this, most of the good stuff that happens is in the climax of the story. And again, it's really hard to go into spoilers here because it's a mystery. I don't want to ruin the mystery for anyone curious enough to want to check this out. So I can't really talk about the climax. Just know it's very fast, very high octane, very high energy, and it doesn't miss a beat, and you're really engrossed in listening to what's going on. Which is good because up until the climax, this is the story that drags the most. Like, as I was listening to these, this story was the point when I began to pick up my phone more often and check what time I was at and how much time I had left in this story. But there are some good things in it too. Like in the last two stories, when the team split up, it was Jenny and Strax. And in this story, it's Vastra and Strax, which is a very interesting dynamic. Sorry about that. I had to take care of something real quick. Anyway, where was I? Yeah. The team splits up again in this story, which, well, they do it in all three stories, kind of, so I'll save that for the end. But in the last two stories, it was Jenny and Strax, while Vastra went and did her own thing. And in this story, it's actually Vastra and Strax. And it's an interesting dynamic. It's a really fun dynamic, but I think I like Jenny and Strax more. I think there's more banter between them. I think there's more chemistry between Katrin Stewart and Dan Starkey. They play off each other so well, and Because really, a lot of what's going on here is just Vastra not putting up with Strax. Like, for example, because of how it's spelled, Strax is often talking about the Green Witch, which, he's mistaking for Greenwich, and he thinks that's what they're facing, a Green Witch. And there's actually a fun scene in the middle of this story where, they meet up, and as they're putting the clues together to what's going on, Strax goes, "I have a question," and Vastra goes, "All right, go ahead." And Strax says, I think I wrote it down exactly, "Where does the Green Witch fit in?" And Vastra's response is unclear, which is kind of fun for their dynamic because it says that Vastra isn't putting up with Strax's, I don't want to say stupidity, so putting up with Strax's ignorance, but rather than just, try to explain it or correct him, she's just, "Okay, you do you, I'll take care of it." But yeah, no, until you get to that climax, it does take a while for this story to pick up. And I guess really there's nothing more to say there so we'll move on to the overview. So this was my most hyped, most anticipated release from Big Finish of 2019, and thankfully, it did not disappoint. It wasn't as good as I thought it would be, but it was still good, which I'm thankful for because I was concerned, because the Paternoster Gang you could pretty much say they're quirky side characters, and what makes quirky side characters work in a show is they usually have a straight man to play off of, the lead character. Just for example, there's a reason the show is called Will and Grace and not Jack and Karen. So, when you take the quirky side characters and make them the lead, you run the risk of the bit getting old or running stale, which thankfully Neve McIntosh, Katrin Stewart, and Dan Starkey are so good and work so good off each other that never happens. The big issue with the characters here is their development, which admittedly I do understand because, for one, this is the first series, so it's just, let's take the characters we know, put them in the lead, and sort of see if this works, Where do I want to go there? So I imagine in the following releases, we will get more in terms of their character development. Because really, in this story, they were kind of, their characters in terms of development and evolution and such were kind of stagnated from where they were the last time we saw them in Doctor Who. So yeah, and we do meet some new characters. We have Inspector Cotton, who is sort of their police contact. And there is another character who shows up in the final story named Old Smallpiece, who Vastra and Jenny treat as a crackpot, but Strax treats him like a friend and sort of as an informant, to see if I can make a comparison. He is the Huggy Bear to the Paternoster Gang, Starsky and Hutch. Not the most perfect comparison, but I think it's one that works. And I think part of it, too, part of why this series isn't as good as it could have been, is that it was trying so hard to not be Jago and Lightfoot, which is a concern a lot of people, a lot of fans, a lot of Big Finish listeners had with this series, because Jago and Lightfoot ended with the passing of Trevor Baxter, and then sometime later the Paternoster Gang was announced, which, mystery solvers in Victorian England. So understandably, people were concerned. Thankfully, it's not, but I think that's where all the focus this series was on it trying not to be Jago and Lightfoot. They're both very lighthearted, very fun series, but the Paternoster Gang is more tongue-in-cheek. I hesitate to call it comedy because it's not a straight comedy. Also, even though they're both sci-fi, Jago and Lightfoot is usually more on the fantasy side of things. Like, you know, they deal with werewolves, vampires, fortune tellers, etc. And there will be a scientific explanation to it, but it's presented much more fantastic, much more fantasy. Whereas the Paternoster Gang is much more science fiction. You know, it's aliens, advanced technology. And as I said, it's very much going for a steampunk kind of thing. And in that respect, I think we need more of Inspector Cotton, you know, their police contact, because pretty much he's just, his character, there was no character. He was just, you know, I'm the guy you talk to at the police. I felt like he was pretty much just meant to be not Inspector Quick, who played the same role in Jago and Lightfoot. Also interesting, I did not know this, because prior to this series coming out, Big Finish announced that the Paternoster Gang had been planned up to Heritage 4, so which means we will be getting 4 series of the Paternoster Gang. And in the making of for this set, David Richardson said that, yeah, the stories are all going to add up and be one big arc. Which we didn't really get much of here, but it was potentially kind of hinted at the end. But all in all, this was a decent series, and I expect going forward the sets will get better and better, so I'm going to give this it's very middle of the road, but if you can get past that... Oh, I forgot to talk about the characters. Well, and every time I do a spin-off, I mean to talk about this, and I never do. I love the theme song to this series. I don't know if it's the same music composer. I should have checked, but yeah. But, you know, Big Finish with their spin-off seems to be really good at when it comes to creating a theme that embodies the series, you know, like that it's playing for, representing, you know. The Diary of River Song is very bombastic. It's James Bond meets Indiana Jones, which sums up River perfectly. Missy is whimsical yet chaotic. You know, the War Master, all their themes for their spin-offs are great. And the music throughout this series is also really good. Was there anything else? Right, the characters. So, Madam, like I said, there's not much to talk about in terms of development or evolution, but hopefully we'll see more of that in the future. But there are some things to note. You know, we have Madame Vastra, the leader of this little group, and that's pretty much it. You know, everyone knows her as the Great Detective. It's very obvious she's meant to be a Sherlock Holmes type of character, but we don't really see any of that. I mean, you could infer some of what makes her the Great Detective. For example, when she meets Vela in A Photograph to Remember, she displays heightened senses, like a sense of smell, and in A Photograph, in The Cars That Ate London, she uses her Silurian psychic abilities to interrogate a person. But aside from those two instances, we don't really see a lot of what makes her the Great Detective, and she doesn't really stand out compared to some of the other great literary detectives: Hercule Poirot, Miss Marple, Sherlock Holmes, Jessica Fletcher. She doesn't stand out among some of those other fictional detectives. She doesn't differentiate herself other than the fact that she's a Silurian. Strax is Strax. He is a very divisive character in the Doctor Who fandom, and I can understand why, but I think it helps that he has the best lines in this series. You know, he mostly gets the punchlines. And Dan Starkey is great at playing the Centaurans anyway, because usually in Big Finish stories, it's usually him who does the Suntarans. But, yeah. Oh, there's so much. What else did I have anything else to say about Strax? No, shoot. Sorry, it's also like 80 degrees, so I am kind of cooking a little bit, so excuse my scatterbrainness. And finally, Jenny, who might be the weakest character of this series, of this gang even, because we don't get a lot with her, and even her role in the team seems unclear, you know? Like, Vastra is the leader, and she is the brains. And then you have Strax, who is the enforcer. He is very obviously the muscle. And then you have Jenny. And it at times seems like she's also meant to be an enforcer of some kind, but... And she does display a decent amount of intelligence as well, but it feels like her role isn't as defined. Like, in A Photograph to Remember, they send her to Tom Foster's photography shop in the guise of getting a portrait done, and it's like, as the only human of the team, is she meant to be the infiltrator, you know, the sort of the spy? And I'd like to see Jenny's role expanded as well. So overall, the Paternoster Gang is very average, but it does show a lot of promise. Wow, I rambled on for that longer than I wanted to. So anyway, I do give it a recommendation, but I do so with caution because, again, jeez, at this point you could take a shot for how often I've said it's average. So join me next time. At least for my next planned review. I don't know if I'll have anything between now and then, but next time, Big Finish will celebrate their 20th anniversary of Doctor Who audios. Not their 20th anniversary full stop, just their 20th anniversary of having the Doctor Who license and doing audios with it. And we will be doing 2 videos on their big 20th anniversary spectacular, The Legacy of Time. So what did you think of my review of the Paternoster Gang? What did you think of the Paternoster Gang if you'd heard it? Start a conversation in the comments below. Like, comment, subscribe. Click the little bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. In the description box below, you'll find the link to my Twitter, where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. And you will find the link to my Ko-fi, where you could support the channel if you so wish. This is the Sentinel, watching over Geekdom, and I'll see you guys next time.